You're watching ITV1, now the national news with Mark Austin and Mary Nightingale, and ITV West news with Richard Liddon and Jenny Hull.
The airline passenger who developed 2 deep vein thromboses on a long-haul flight.
Scientists trying to develop a plane as small as a bee.
And to sleep or not to sleep, baby hedgehogs confused by the greenhouse effect. Good evening. A man from Wiltshire has survived having not 1 but 2 DVTs or blood clots while on a flight to Australia. Deep vein thrombosis has only recently been recognised by airlines as a real health hazard, especially on long-haul flights.
In a moment, we'll talk to an expert about what they are and how to avoid them. But first, here's the story of a man who, despite taking all the precautions, still ended up in hospital.
David Griffin's time with his grandchildren at home in the village of Broughton Gifford has always been important, but this half-term is extra special. A few weeks ago, his life was threatened by a condition that he didn't know he had, and didn't feel until 5 days after he'd taken a 17-hour flight to Australia. He landed in hospital.
I got up that morning and I felt very lightheaded and shortage of breath, thinking perhaps I was having an asthma attack. But it was only when I collapsed they discovered I had a couple of blood clots on my lung.
At 64 years old, David Griffin is in an age bracket that's susceptible to DVT. That's why when he and his wife travel to Perth to visit their daughter and grandchildren, they always follow the medical advice. This trip was no exception.
I was told that had the clots moved and blocked the arteries to my heart, I could have been history, to quote their words. So it's, brings you up with a joke somewhat.
Amazingly, 3 weeks after David Griffin got out of hospital, he was back on a plane for another marathon journey. He loves flying and his experience won't put him off it. Although at the back of his mind, he knows he's lucky to be alive.
You sort of look at things in the cold light of day and realise just how close you were. But, of course, having no pain and no inkling, it's hard to understand it.
What's easy to grasp, though, is that now every day brings with it experiences he so nearly wasn't here to enjoy. Rupert Evelyn, ITV West News, Wiltshire.
With me is David Mitchell, a consultant vascular surgeon at Bristol Southmead Hospital. Mr. Mitchell, is this condition getting more common?
I think it probably has been around for many years, but we're seeing more of it as more and more people are able to afford to travel for long distances.
And is it just a case of people travelling on long-haul flights, or can this hit you in other sort of forms of transport?
We recognised it many years ago in people having coach holidays where they would be sat in a bus for a long time, but it can happen on a train, in a car, sitting at work or on an aeroplane. And
just remind us of the sort of precautions you can take to try to prevent it.
The things that we advise people to do are, if they have a known history of thrombosis or they're older, that's probably over about the age of about 50, we would suggest that they would wear compression stockings or flight socks that you can buy in the airport. And we would suggest they take aspirin for a day or two before the journey and probably for a day or two after they arrive at their destination. Just 1 tablet on a full stomach each day.
And just how serious a condition can it be?
Well, a lot of venous thrombosis can be relatively mild and not cause any problems other than maybe some leg aching or slight swelling. But it can be a life-threatening condition if the clots leave the leg and travel to the lungs.
And briefly, would you know early on there was something serious going on, or would you just think you've got a pain in the leg or the arm or something?
Well, there may be no symptoms at all until you're struck down by the clot moving to the lungs. So it can be completely silent until disaster strikes.
David Mitchell, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
Now, I don't know if the decision to build Stonehenge was controversial at the time, but plans to reroute the A303 away from it certainly are. A public inquiry into the scheme to build a tunnel to reduce the impact of traffic on the ancient site started today. All are agreed the road which runs alongside the stones needs moving, but that's where the agreement ends.
Another day of heavy traffic on the A303 near Stonehenge. According to the Highways Agency, it's used by 33,000 vehicles a day, is overloaded and an accident black spot. Now, after 40 years of debate, a public inquiry into a £200 million scheme to build a new road in a tunnel has finally got underway. It would be 2 kilometres long, and there's also to be a bypass for the village of Winterbourne Stoke. But not everyone is happy. The World Heritage Site is 4 kilometres long, and the National Trust, who own the land, say the entrance to the tunnels would ruin part of the site.
It's very important for the sense of place. As I say, it's very easy to think of Stonehenge, it's simply the stones. It's not. It's everything that goes on around it, all those barrows, all those ancient trackways. We want people to walk out into the landscape and enjoy it, and to have peace while they're there.
It would be possible to make the tunnel longer, but it's a question of what benefits are achieved for the additional cost. With the published scheme at £200 million, a longer tunnel would cost in the order of £400 million.
The tunnel would put the stones in a natural setting and would allow for a new centre for the 800,000 people who visit every year. The inquiry is expected to last around 4 months, with the inspector making public his findings by the end of the year. Work on this mammoth scheme could then start within 2 years. Mike Pearce, ITV West News, Stonehenge.
Alarming allegations have been made that drug dealers as young as 13 are operating in our region. They're said to sell cannabis, ecstasy and even cocaine just outside school gates. One Wiltshire MP is furious that it's apparently going on outside a school in his constituency. But the really worrying thing is that it could be happening anywhere. If it's happening at your school, we'd like to hear from you. We'll give you a number in a minute. First, this report from Richard Martin.
Children in Wootton Bassett near Swindon at the start of half-term, a day after reading claims that pupils at their school deal in drugs. They told me the report in a national newspaper came as no surprise to any of them.
All you got to do is go up to a dodgy person, say you wanted to smoke drugs, just go up to them and go, oh, can you get me some cannabis, weed or whatever, and then they'll get it to you by the next day probably.
The teachers don't really know. It could be on the field, in the classroom, anywhere, just under wraps sort of thing.
They smoke it in the morning and then go to the school, all their eyes really red and stuff.
Cannabis, ecstasy, even cocaine. The newspaper claims deals have been done inside the school and in view of the town police station. Officers want the public to help them stamp out the problem.
What I'm hoping for is that there is going to be something positive from this, and that parents, the community, the public are going to come and speak with us and tell us what's going on and give us some information that we can work on.
Nobody from the school would talk on camera today, but in a statement it said it took this whole issue very seriously, that it had a strict anti-drugs policy which included educating children on the dangers of the misuse of drugs. It said it was investigating the report thoroughly. The school has a good academic reputation, but the 3-page special report in the News of the World won't have done that any good. The local MP says other schools should be on their guard.
It's probably wrong to think of this being a Wootton Bassett problem. I mean, it's a problem which occurs in just about any secondary school anywhere you care to mention. And I bet you if you went into Swindon or Bristol or anywhere else, you'd find it a far worse problem. But nonetheless, we can't afford to ignore it. We have to take it seriously.
A recent survey suggests 4 out of every 10 youngsters aged 14 to 18 admit to taking illegal drugs. If that's true, then the claims about Wootton Bassett School are alarming, but nothing out of the ordinary.
Well, are you aware of drug dealers operating outside your school? If you are, please give us a call on our news hotline number. It's coming up now. It's 0845 606 5325. If it's busy, please call back later. That's 0845 606 5325, or you could email us at itvwestnews@itv.com.